the Welcome everybody to the Team Coaching Learning Conversation, and happy Easter weekend for all of those who are out there celebrating. Hope you're finding lots of eggs all around the place. And for others, happy Passover and everything else happy. Joining me today is Dorothy Atchinson, somebody I've known for quite a few years and delighted to welcome to the show. It's just me and Dorothy today. Krista and Melissa are traveling and caught up in other plans. So let me tell you a little bit about Dorothy, and then I'm going to let her say more about herself. Dorothy is her own business is Lucid Coaching Consulting. She's an accredited coaching supervisor, specifically trained in systems, so working a lot with senior leaders, senior leadership teams in general, groups. And she's learning faculty, or sits on the faculty of the Coaching Supervision Academy, which is, I think, one of the most globally renowned coaching supervision trainings. I myself have been part of that training. And she's been doing supervision, coaching supervision for more than 10 years, and coaching leaders, teams, individuals for a lot longer than that. Not trying to age you, Dorothy. I'm trying to give you sort of truth, wisdom, and expertise, a sage amongst us. And I think what really, if you had to sort of sum up everything, and Dorothy will speak for herself, what her passion is not only creating good communication in the workplace, but actually creating or co-creating the space for generative dialogue, which is really very relevant to the whole subject of supervision. And so, Dorothy, maybe a little bit from you. What else would you like our audience today to know about you?
Oh, let's see. I think that I have a passion for relationship at the heart of everything, that you don't get that generative dialogue and you don't co-create that generative dialogue unless you are really leaning into relationship and what it is to be in relationship and to be in good relationship. So if I have to think about my DNA as a practitioner, it would be that. It would be relationship and systems as deriving from that, relationship systems as deriving from that.
And, you know, when you say the words relationship system, of course, that brings to mind that we're both accredited and trained, and also we're on the faculty of CRR Global, which is the world's training institute for organization and relationship systems coaching. What is it specifically about relationship and relationship systems that attracted you? Because I know you came from a media and communications background, like me.
Yes, that's true. We have that in common, don't we? I think we both worked for the BBC, and back in New York, where I used to live 25 years ago, I worked in a variety of different media companies. So it is. So the question is, what is it about systems, relationship systems, that's particularly attractive to me?
Yeah.
I suppose the complexity of them, and the fact that they are what makes the world go round. So relationship systems, as I see them, begins with us. So especially as practitioners, and if we're going to take a supervision framework for this, who are we as practitioners? What is our relationship with ourselves and the many systems inside us, our self-talk, our, how we see ourselves to be? There's a lot of complexity just in the self. And then there are all the different relationships we need to have with other in the workplace and outside of the workplace, our families, our friends, our hobbies. And then there are all of the relationships that need to take place in the workplace or in interaction in the wider world. And to me, it's just basically that interdependency of all things. I find it fascinating and hugely complex.
Yeah, I would say the same. The quote, Martin Buber's quote, "I am because you are," even if you're saying that to the different parts of yourselves, that we're always in relationship, and it's through relationship that we get to know who we are. And so it goes. I agree. Let's just, for the audience, just I'd like to go certain places. I think it is really worth starting at the top, like what is supervision? And then, what is coaching supervision? And then, sort of finally getting our way down to team coaching supervision. What might that look like? But if I was just to start and ask you, how would you define supervision?
Great. Okay. So I suppose the way I would hold supervision is maybe a little different from how people expect. I think that many people, if they don't know about what supervision is, especially in coaching, they might think, as we all do with the word, that it implies a kind of hierarchy. One person is above another person. Like in some countries, people even talk about my supervisor as their boss, right? So it implies this one up, one down type of thing. And I have come to believe that supervision in itself is the ability to reflect on oneself and oneself in practice. What is happening? So it derives, from my understanding, from the healing professions, nursing, social work, therapy, counseling, many types of practice in which, in working with other in relationship, all kinds of things are going on, what we can see and sense, and a whole lot of things that are out of our awareness, or you could say that are in our blind spot.
Yeah.
And
And yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say the things that might trigger something that's residual in us as well.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so for me, supervision, as deriving from the healing professions and the talking therapies, is something in which, with another person or in a group setting, we reflect on what took place with the case we're bringing. What do we know took place, or think we know took place, and what else could have been going on? And so it's that ability to rise up and reflect on what was happening, as opposed to just go on and do the next thing.
Yeah. And it's so obvious when you say it that way, isn't it? I mean, it's like watching a film over and over again and realizing that you miss that bit and you miss that bit. And now you understand the relevance between that bit and that bit. Or reading a book again, and just going, gee, I completely miss the purpose of this story. So there are all these different perspectives, and we can talk about some of the frameworks. And somehow this assumption, I think that we kind of, I certainly, I'm speaking for myself, that there have been moments in my coaching career where I sort of make the assumption that I should know everything and I see everything and I'm competent. And why would I need to go into a reflective space with someone else to look back in order to go forward?
But again, Carissa, I think that I'm not sure how many people in the coaching industry, or even outside of the coaching industry, actually think about what is supervision, because the word, it doesn't come out as reflective practice. It comes out as supervision. And I think the energy of the word is, I'll be found out. I'll be under a microscope. Someone might tell me I'm doing something differently than I want. Someone might tell me that I'm doing something differently than I do it, or I want to do it. And so I wonder if it could be slightly threatening or unpalatable to, let's say, a very seasoned coach.
Yes. And I mean, we can go into the whole idea of, is that even the right word, supervision, for 2 days? But let's not go down that route, because we could get stuck down a whole lot of bad language and vocabulary. So we sort of defining what supervision is and where it has derived from. And it really is a lot about reflective practice, and through another and through the relationship, beginning to see what you haven't necessarily seen in the moment. How would you define coaching supervision? Would you say there's anything more to add there?
I was thinking about this. I think I would define coaching supervision as relatively new, first of all. We've both been around in the industry long enough to remember when a lot of people didn't understand what coaching was, and that has changed over the last couple of decades. Coaching supervision, I believe, is relatively new to the coaching industry. And a little bit like I understand happened with counseling, as counseling became more and more of a profession that people were jumping into, then supervision came along for that. And the coaching industry is growing hugely, and I think supervision is being adopted, partly coaching supervision, to uphold the standards of this profession, which is very different from therapy or counseling. Technically, in most types of coaching, we're meeting the client where they are now and helping them get, from current state to their future state, helping them set what their goals might be and accompanying them and empowering them as they get towards their goals with whatever obstacles are getting in the way. We're not necessarily going back in time or looking at how did you get to be this way? So it's a different type of thing, coaching, from counseling or therapy or social work or nursing. So it needs its own way of reflecting on practice, at least in part.
Yes. And I think especially in today's world and the way that organizations are also being reinvented, but just the world being the pace that it is, the amount of change that it is. And also I think this recognition that presence, mindfulness, consciousness, all these words that now suggest, how do you practice? How do you kind of develop a practice to be more in that state so that you can come at things, from an existential stance of, let's call it love or awakeness or positivity versus, unfortunately, because of just the way our brains are wired, coming from a sort of survival, fear, reactive space. And so from a coaching, if you think about coaching, you see a lot about embodied practice, somatic presence. There seems to be a greater and greater emphasis. And coaching supervision is a place that really encourages that practice and develops your coaching competencies, along with whether it's an ICF competency or the EMCC competencies, to be able to bring that to your practice. Would you say that's?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I would say that at least the way that I learned, which was through the Coaching Supervision Academy, it was very much that. In some ways, by the time I did that program, I'd already had quite some experience as a coach. But I think what I learned as a coaching supervisor was to undo some of what I had learned as a coach. And if I can try and describe that, I think that I was full of my tools and models and ways of getting a client from one place to another place. Coaching supervision taught me how to let go of a lot of that as primary and to focus on being. So I might call all of that doing. I might do my coaching with my clients before. And what I learned through the CSA method of supervision was exactly what you're saying, something more about presence, relational presence, how to really be with a client no matter what is being brought, without the instant urge to do something about it, and understand how together to surface something new that we both don't know yet.
Yeah. I was just going to bring back the concept of systems, and I was going to, we're both trained systemically and to work with relationship systems, but there are many coaches out there who don't necessarily come from that practice, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that we want to say about why it's so important to have those kind of layers and that sort of grittiness of being able to understand some of the group dynamics, for example, organizational dynamics if you're working in organizations.
Well, even if we're talking about coaching supervision separately from team coaching supervision, just a coach especially those coaches who are working in organizations, and many who come to supervision who can afford supervision are working in an organizational context. So we're really wanting to be able to sit in presence with somebody like that in a way that allows, I'm going to use some of the jargon of supervision, that allows us to dip beyond what we see happening on the surface into what else is going on. What are all the things we can't see? And we call that data. What else is happening in the field of the work? Is it mine? Is it yours, client? Is it the client system you're bringing in? How do we sink down together enough to understand systemically what might be taking place? So, for example, a very well-known model of supervision is the 7I model of supervision by Peter Hawkins and Smith. I've forgotten Smith's first name. Apologies to Smith. But it is a model. It's a systemic model where we look at what's happening in self, what's happening in the coach, what's happening in the relationship between so supervisor, supervisee, what's happening in the relationship there, and where might that be mirroring what's happening between the coach and their client relationship, and where might that be mirroring what's happening in their relation with their client in their client organization. We call that parallel process. It's one of the most important parts of working systemically with another person.
Yes, and I think let's just slow down and look at this. So first of all, for somebody who's never heard of coaching supervision, actually, how does it work? I think that would be useful and then coming back to the 7I model specifically, this idea of looking at a situation through 7 different lenses, through 7 eyes, and each one of them being able to offer some new insight, some data that you might not have experienced or understood in the moment, just because of the complexity of this system that you're in. Yeah. So shall we start just briefly? So how does coaching supervision work? Like, do you want to have a go? We can both put it together.
How does it work? Well, let's see. Client comes to supervisor and says something. A very simple model might be: bring a client who's intriguing you for some reason. Don't necessarily feel like you have to bring your problems, by the way. Everyone thinks that supervision is where you're supposed to bring your problems. You can absolutely bring your celebrations, what is working, because that's going to help you do more of that. You want more of that. But let's just, on the very basic level, supervisee brings to supervisor a client they're curious about. A very simple framework might be, what's going well? What do you notice is really working with this client? Or in that last session you had, what are you particularly proud of? What happened? Second question might be, what isn't going so well? Or where might you have some questions? Or even, did you get stuck? Or something happened that you don't understand? So you go to that layer of, this is what I can see. This is what I'm proud of. This is what I'm not so sure about. And then, very much like coaching, rather than coming in and telling the client what you should do, the supervisor might go, so if you could do something differently, what might that be? What would you do if you could do this again? So at a very basic level, I think that's a nice, easy framework to just explain how, in reflecting with someone else, a supervisee is going to get a bit more of a picture of what's going on. Most people aren't stopping to even think about what went well. What could they do differently? What didn't go so well? Because most of us are speeding along at a much faster pace than that.
Super. So, and you can do that one-to-one with a coaching supervisor, or you could do that in a group. So there are many, many, many ways of doing group supervision. Is there anything, Dorothy, that you think we want to touch on here, or shall we put that to the side and go more into? I think parallel process is really a key.
Yeah. So that's at its basic level. And I guess let's bring a group in here. In a group context, one of the things that we're also doing is all of the voices in the group are listening to the case. And, often people will bring something that they don't understand, that's troubling for them, whether it's individual or group supervision. And in listening, what I'm inviting is to let go of the story and notice everything else that's going on while you're listening to this story, while you're holding this supervisor, holding space for the supervisee.
Yeah.
And you might, for example, as the supervisor, you might start to notice you're tapping your feet a lot. You might lose focus on what the client is saying, lose presence. That might be you, or it might be the case that's being brought. You might get feelings in your belly, or you might go cold, or you might notice they are telling their story really, really fast and they haven't stopped for breath. And all of these things, whether it's what's happening within me, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling as the supervisor, or what I'm noticing in them, are possibly what's happening between us right now, or possibly aspects of what they're bringing. A client who speaks very, very fast is probably speaking about a client themselves that they're working with who speaks very fast, or an organization that works very fast.
Yes. So what is going on between you and me as, coach supervisor and supervisee that is telling us something about what's going on for you as a coach with your client? And that could be one of the things. And yes,
we want to offer it in supervision in a way that we're not attached, that we're not saying that's going on, but going, I notice that I have felt really impatient while you've been exploring, bringing your case here. I don't usually feel impatient. Is there anything does that mean anything for you? And the person might go, oh, I'm really impatient with this client, or I'm working in an organization, it's a startup, and they're super impatient. And then they can start to make some meaning from that about, so, well, what is the impact on your relationship of that impatience, and what might you want to do about that? And as a perfect example of surfacing something that may not have been overtly brought to the session, but which together in relationship with a systemic view, we notice together something else that's going on.
Yeah. And maybe I'll make this even more concrete with an example. I was volunteering for a group coaching supervision demo a couple of weeks ago. And the person who brought the case, the coach that brought the case, just literally wanted everybody in the group to voice what they heard and what they felt, what was coming up for them. And it was really fascinating to hear the different metaphors that people were bringing into the space and the reaction that this coach telling the story of their client was having on them. Exactly what you just said. And that, after 15 minutes, she was able to walk away with some real concrete, tangible steps of what she was going to do, whereas before she just felt stuck and kind of powerless. Suddenly there was choice, there was awareness, there was choice, and you could see this big smile, this sense of something had been unveiled, and it sounds that is just really powerful. Some people could. Yeah, I'm just saying. I won't say what it sounds like. I'm just saying that power of that process, that power of that process, and it's amazing. If you just think about a group coaching supervision, could be, let's say, what is it, 90 minutes or something?
Oh, I think people do it. People do it at, you can have a whole day. You can have half a day. You can do an hour. I run groups. I run small groups. I like 90 minutes or 2 hours. I think it's difficult to, and that's online, right? So that's a Zoom session. And it's difficult to hold, because you're asking the whole group to come into relational presence, to create a trusting container to do the work and to stay present for each other during that time, because we only really surface all of this information, this data, by being present with each other in a safe space. And it's a lot to ask to do that for longer than 2 hours.
Yes. So we've talked about supervision. We've talked about coaching supervision, group supervision, one-on-one. I think it'd be nice to sort of dive, because I know our audience primarily are interested in team coaching. We both know that the ICF, certainly there are no, defined competencies for a team coaching supervisor as yet. And
There are
yet the field,
only
yeah,
recent competencies for team coaching from the ICF, actually.
exactly. So we're about to say, so the team coaching and the focus on team coaching that has just been growing over the last, much less than a decade, but certainly it's been there for some time, and it's a big feature of many people's practice these days. So we're going to need team coaching supervisors. So I've certainly have coached team coaches and as pairs and individually. But shall we maybe start by saying what might be different if we were now looking at team coaching supervision? What might we think are some of the base camp behaviors, for example, of the supervisor in that context?
Of a team coaching supervisor?
Yeah, of a team coaching supervisor.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that there aren't yet competencies, or at least I'm not aware of any. I don't want to say that there aren't because I'm not aware of any. But I do believe, like team coaching, this is a very fast developing profession. And as a supervisor of many years now, that concerns me. Because one of the things about effective supervision from my point of view is that it slows right down, that it creates a lot of space. It creates a lot of room for emergence. And what I think is going on is like a great recognition that we suddenly need more team coach training and more team coach supervision training and more team coach supervisors. And I am not making my view the truth, but I think I see this tremendous sort of tidal wave of options and trainings and things coming out there. And I wonder how they're coming about, because I think what you really need for team coaching supervision is the ability to work with systemic complexity. And that doesn't happen by going rocket ship fast. And it really, I believe, requires the ability to hold space, hold fire, hold off on acting, be with some discomfort. A typical team coach bringing a team to team coaching supervision will arrive with a torrent of information. Yeah. And might want, they almost don't know where to begin. They're not sure what they're bringing. They're bringing their complexity into the situation, and it can take a while for them to even understand what it is that is their question or what they're grappling with. And whether that's working with a team coach individually, and I do a lot of that, or working with a team coach in a group, there's a kind of, I allow a certain amount of download because I think that just helps them arrive with their case. And whatever they bring is relevant. You just have to trust that. But then there's a kind of like, whew. So where I see budding supervisors or trainee supervisors going wrong with a team coach is they're trying to understand, just like the team coach is, they are trying to understand what's happening here, what's happening. And actually I believe we're trying to do is to create a space for, what am I noticing? This is really where the ability from coaching supervision to understand there's a lot of data that we can't see here.
Yeah.
So what am I feeling? What am I sensing into? What is the group noticing? What is the cadence and the rhythm? Like, I go really soft focus with team coaching supervision. What else is happening besides what we can see happening here?
Yeah. And coming back to the 7-eyed model, one of the, if you're working in an organization, when you think about all the contracting that has to be doing, and we're talking about not just the paperwork, we're talking about the psychological contracting and the fact that that is a live process that continuously needs to be kind of looked at and nurtured and tended to. And you've got the team that you might be coaching, you've got the pair of team coaches or the individual team coach. You've got all the stakeholders of that system and that organization. There are a lot of moving parts. to keep sensing into.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned contracting, by the way, and psychological contracting. And in case people don't know what that is, it's a huge part of what we're paying attention to as coaching supervisors. Again, it's about what's different from what we have overtly said and written on paper and agreed together about how we'll work, and what wasn't said. All of those unexpressed, sometimes unknown expectations that we're having of each other and of the space. And it's impossible to know all of that. And when we do a piece, when a team coach does a piece of work in an organization, they're contracting, as we call it, with so many different people. The sponsor, it might be an HR person or the head of the team who's brought them in. Then they might be contracting with, let's say the HR person brought in the team coach. Then they're contracting with the head of the team or the whole team, every member of the team. Many team coaches forget that. They've contracted with their sponsor, but not with every member of the team in whatever way that happens. Or their co-coach. Many team coaches are working, as you said, with a co-coach. That's a piece of contracting. How does this relationship between me and my co-coach mirror? Do we get inducted by the system and start to display some of what the system is doing in our relationship? Can we take what's good about our relationship and start to impact that relationship that way? There's so much going on, and I get excited talking about it, and it's also a little bit, well, it's a lot complex.
It is, and I really feel that I want to mention Alison Hodge here, who I think is kind of at the frontier of this whole area of, she's a highly experienced, she's been on this show, she's a highly experienced coaching supervisor, but seems to be, bringing through the CSA a new group and a new era. You started doing some research with her a number of years ago, so...
Oh, I didn't do research for that. I mean, Alison and I have been colleagues at CSA for a long time, and I have the hugest respect for her. But as you say, in 2016, I think it was, I did the first training that I could see. I called it a training in team coaching supervision. And it was Alison who with Edna Murdoch from the CSA, were offering a place to talk, for the first time that I could see, to talk specifically about team coaching supervision and how much more complex it is when you now get all that much more data in the room and all that much more systemic information. And then I loved it so much that I asked Alison if I could participate the next year, and she allowed me to participate as faculty. And I think now interestingly, we looked to bring that to the marketplace somewhere around 2018, 2019, and it wasn't quite the right time. But I believe now, especially with the ICF having released the team coaching competencies and the EMCC and the ACC and the other bodies, I believe now is the right time for people wanting to understand both how to be supervisors, how to develop mastery in their practice through being supervisors, as well as how to be team coaching supervisors, and to really know how to work with some of those complex group issues.
Yes. And maybe also, just as we are, so there are people who are trained, they're practitioners who are trained as team coaches in many models. You and I have both, again, been trained in, I've been trained in a number, but when we go back to ORSC, Organization Relationship Systems Coaching, one of the ways that, I think the advantages for me of being trained in that model was really learning how to co-create, co-facilitate, co-coach. So this whole idea, there's you, there's me, and then there's this third thing called the relationship, what we call the third entity.
Third entity, yeah.
So when it comes to then, if you have that language and if you have that in your practice, then when it comes to looking at us as a team coaching pair in our client system with our client team, in that much complex, that I think it sort of lends itself to, more easily than if you've only been trained to work individually, and you may be working with another team coach, but you don't necessarily have the language or that awareness. So I think there is, the question I was about to ask is, do you think you have to have experience of team coaching to be a team coaching supervisor? And I'm kind of saying I would lean to yes, but what's your thoughts?
I think actually just to be controversial, because I believe conflict is a good thing, and I learned
Yes,
that
please
from,
do.
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Would it help? Absolutely. And I've been a team leader myself in the past. I've run teams. Does that help? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it a requirement? I wouldn't say so, but I do think that being a good supervisor and understanding what it is as far as I know, so my supervisor, she's called Amanda Ridings. I could applaud her till the cows come home. I've been working with her ever since I met her in CSA. We work together monthly. She is not a team coach. But she has provided so much support to me as a team coach. She is able, I think she used to be an accountant, and she understands mathematics. And she, I think, uses mathematics as part of what informs her and her credibility to hold me as a team coach with systemic complexity.
Beautiful.
And I couldn't have done without Amanda's support as a team coach. So that is partly what I'm saying. No, I don't think you have to have been a team coach to be a good team coach supervisor, but I do think you need to be a very experienced practitioner and a very experienced supervisor.
Okay, and so maybe I'm going to jump over the fence and join you. What about having an understanding of how human systems work or work systemically? What about that?
Yeah. Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. I think that if we're going to enter into any supervision, really, but especially team coaching supervision, it's really all about systems and systemic complexity, relationship systems and systemic complexity. And that's where, I have not, apart from Allison's course, I have not trained as a team coaching supervisor because there wasn't a training. But I have brought, at around the same time, I trained in CSA and in ORSC and came together with both of those strands to see how they interrelate.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been using both interchangeably for a decade now. Mm-hmm. I see them as inextricable. I don't know how to take them apart from each other. And what I would say about the ORSC model in particular is that now that it's developed what they call the 5 relationship systems intelligence principles, and they are, by the way, introducing systemic group supervision already and developing a training for systemic supervision for team coaches. The RSI principles are essentially a way of working with any system. And that is, recognizing that all systems are in a constant state of emergence. They're always changing, which means that there's always conflict happening, because every time there's change, there's conflict.
Absolutely.
Every system has a unique identity and personality, that every system is naturally creative and intelligent and generative, which is something many team coaches forget, and they get caught in the same thing coaches get caught in of, let me sort it out for you, but actually the system does the work. And then that systems rely on the voices of the system and the roles of the system to understand each other and to organize themselves.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read a comment that we can see there that's coming up from one of the audience, Michael. Michael, yes, you've said that you love ORSC. I think you've got 2 people who would say the same, and understanding the third entity. So that's the relationship between all the different parts of the system has been transformational for you and your clients. And that is, I think, Dorothy, we would probably say ditto, right? Yes. So I just want to tap onto something else, which is so many members of the audience are trained in the 6 team conditions. So that would be the work of Ruth Wagaman and Richard Hawkins. Wow, my head is, yes, thank you so much. My head just,
mine does
go there. I haven't slept this. I had no sleep last night. So coming to that, how important do you think then it is for a team coaching supervisor to have some understanding, or any kind of coaching supervisor to have an understanding of the different models that your supervisee is working with as a coach?
So I'm catching myself in the temptation to answer that question immediately. but I want to not do that, to model that actually what I've learned through supervision is to sit with things and see what emerges if I do that. And I noticed that my answer feels similar to what I was going to say, which is it's kind of like a yes and like before.
Yeah.
I don't know the model that you just described. Do I think that will get in the way of me working with a team coach who is trained in that model? No, because it could be that model that is in the way of that team coach showing up in the work. And I would take my place in the system as someone who doesn't know as having some validity in work, because the team doesn't know the model either, does it? So, there's something about if I knew the model, it might help, but it might also create a little bit of collusion between me and the coach. And then together, we might miss what it is that is needed here in the voice of the system that doesn't know the model.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I like, so that not knowing, that extra bit of curiosity that it might afford, really being clueless, like, being able to ask the ignorant question, actually might be an advantage, maybe a gift. So it's a yes and.
And Chris, I would just say, especially with team coaching supervision, because even this is an interview, it's not a session. But
Yes.
even here, we're moving at a pace. The world is moving at a pace. And you and I are here, but if we were in a supervision session, we would have this dialogue with less of a time constraint and with more of a what is underneath what we're saying that's really important, if we don't immediately rush to ask our next question or answer it in a clever way. Something more interesting will come out that's actually going to transform the work, I believe.
I really want to pick up on that. I was heading to the same place. I'm noticing my own pace here, which is sort of almost driving a conversation, which is almost in direct opposite how I typically show up as a coaching supervisor, which is with a huge amount of stillness. And I love silence. And the silence is so full. And my experience, probably half my practice of coaching supervision practice is coaches who just want to upgrade themselves. They're trying to integrate the different learnings they've had to evolve their sense of self as a practitioner in the world today, knowing that, we are going through, if we, bring some Joanna Macy in here, the meta narratives of our time are the great unraveling, the great turning, and business as usual. So, as a coach, you're often being with an organization or an individual or team, where you can just feel the organization unraveling. The system is, things are dying. And yet there's also what is that great turning where the hope and the faith sits, and where the new shoots of the next iteration of what is going to come next is there, and being with that emergence. And so that how do they then, as a practitioner, stay most resourcefully in that space when it is so easy to become overwhelmed, exhausted, robotic, etc., etc.
As you say that, and I notice how relieved I suddenly feel that we slowed down. That even in a context that isn't a supervision context, my thinking is clearer now than when I was rushing to try and answer questions eloquently, or to be on, or because that's the dominant for most of us at the moment in any type of work setting or team setting. But just dropping down a little bit, it's given me a sense of I can breathe and I can think a bit better. And that silence you mentioned, I can think a bit better. In the last 3 years with the pandemic, I many people talk about supervision as a place where you go for the normative, the formative, and the restorative aspects of working as a practitioner. I felt that what supervision was really being used for, and my team coaching actually, was a space for people to just arrive blinking with their mouths open because it was such a shock what happened to us systemically in the system we live in that is dying. The bigger I-7 of what's happening in the world is, we need to be aware of that. And some of us can't be, it gets too much. But it was a place to sit and be and reflect together, even teams. I mean, that's, a lot of the work I'm doing with teams at the moment is helping them just have a different conversation than they usually have, not using a tool or, but using concepts, using ways of helping them show up and be with each other.
Yeah.
Very much of a supervision approach, actually.
It's interesting because if I just come for a minute to my coaching practice, I've sort of started to introduce that we need to create a baseline of mental fitness. If you know Shiraj Shamini's work on positive intelligence, just the number of people that present as not being able to even be present in the moment. So how can we go to motivation and meaning or influence and impact, kind of those areas that tend to be brought in, if we haven't created the container within us, to be able to sense our way and have that deep connection that allows us to be vulnerable, to build trust, and to make sense, make meaning of what's going on, not from a sort of a survival fear-based brain, which has been activated because of the pace and the complexity, but from a place of possibility and curiosity and a much more resourceful.
And you said it earlier, but I'll bring it in, and love.
And love. Yes,
Yeah.
I was going to say, it is. I've kind of fallen in love, if you want, with this phrase that somebody shared with me, that if you think about the brain, and that we the biggest is, of course, our sort of survival brain, where all our self-saboteurs sit, our fears. So if we think about, again, system, when you're listening as a team coach, coaching supervisor, you may be listening for all those different voices in the system and how they're playing out. But so there's, how do we intercept that sort of automatic survival response so that we can lean into our, what Shizad would say, the sage response. And to me, that is leaning into this existential stance of a commitment to love. You're coming from this place, and the more you can come from that place, the more you can inhabit that existential stance. Well, for me personally, the more joy you have, but also if you think of it from a team coaching or coaching supervisor, the more the capacity there is in the space for that generative dialogue that you mentioned to begin.
Well, and I'd go yes, and I'd go one step further to say that if there's a continuum, Robin Showett often talks about the continuum between fear and love, and that we're always somewhere on that continuum. And you're talking, many organizations are much closer to fear than they are to love, right? And if we're working as team coaches, we're going to be getting all of that data. To really do the supervision work is to, Theory U is a huge part of the CSA teaching, and to let go, to let come, requires me to love myself and love my client, and requires my client to love me and love themselves. And in a group, a certain amount of that, to not have the answer and to sit in the not knowing together is terrifying for us as human beings, I believe.
Yeah.
When we get there, it's wonderfully inspiring and generative, and it's where all innovation comes from, and it's extraordinary. But the journey to it is, I feel, for me as a historically as a control freak, it was life-changing to let go of And as a team coach, I wanted to control everything, and it never goes the way I want it to go. I have to be able to work with whatever's emerging in every moment, as you said about ORSC, be able to create from what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So we've got a question from Claudia Renchi about CSA teaching. Just Claudia, before I go to that, I just want to pick up Dorothy. You mentioned Theory U. I think we should underscore that's the work of Otto Scharmer and his colleagues at the Presencing Institute in MIT. It is kind of one of the one or two, I think, systems change theories that are out there to support truly transformational change at a societal level and an organizational level, come with new products. It's been around for a while. We'll definitely reference it in the show notes. But the point that you're making, Dorothy, is in the same way that, you know, being in supervision encourages you to see your blind spots. Otto Scharmer would say that the number one blind spot of leadership is the who, right? We don't see what we don't see. And so again, one of the real gifts, we talked about the many gifts of supervisions, one of the many gifts of supervision, whether you're a coach, a team coach, a leader, is being able to shine a light on those blind spots, and remove the blind spots if you want. Is that it's having that mirror
light on them? Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
And I guess if I were to say one of the main things that is the gift of supervision for me, I probably signed up for it to become a better practitioner, and for the professional development part of it. And I think what I would say, maybe even as like a parting thing about this, is that the development of myself, my personal development, my relationship with myself, my desire to understand myself and who I am is how I do anything. And it's different from how you do or how anybody else here does, is what has been so crucial, that I can only take people as far as I can go. And with team coaching, if I used to have a real issue with conflict, I learned that in one of Alison Hodges' courses, like that when conflict came into the room, I actually would go into freeze. And that can still happen. But I did extensive work on myself to be able to sit with and hold conflict, because I saw that it was impeding my ability to be a team coach and even a team coach supervisor. So I think really, if I had a message about what is supervision and why would it be important for anybody, especially team coaching supervisors, it would be that continued evolution of self with love, to be able to hold more of everyone and everything. That's really, to me, the essence of it.
That's fantastic. I would just build on that. So if we think in this world, we're now talking about diversity, equity, inclusion a lot. There's always gender, there's racism, there's homophobia, all these universals, and how they play out through you, your own thoughts on them, how they're playing out in any system with the client. You know, supervision is just the most fabulous place for you to become aware of your stance in all of those and your part in all of those, and actually just to become a much, is it right for me to say a cleaner vessel? I don't know if that's the right thing, but you know, there's something about a more robust, maybe
More aware,
stronger, more aware. Yeah,
more aware. I think it's really a journey of awareness and compassion for self and other. Yeah.
And I think some of the things we haven't mentioned, I mean, if I think about myself, one of the things I'm learning to be is a nature facilitator as well. And I want to take some of supervision groups I can see, you know, into coaching supervision groups or for leaders into nature, because I think we really need to reconnect. And there's a yearning to reconnect with the bigger, wider ecological system. And through that, be able to understand how we orient ourselves through this very messy period that we're in. But we haven't talked about things like, of course, there are some fantastic tools, you know, the whole use of constellations, the whole use of reflective writing practice and journaling, not just journaling, and lots of people know journaling, but then reflecting on your journaling and going at layers and layers deeper. So I know we could have a whole other session about, you know, we're coming close to the hour.
So
there's a lot there, and a lot more. And there are many wonderful books as well that have some of these techniques, have different stances. I love some of the books that I read when I started this journey, and we can put some of those up. But I just wanted to go back to, you said that you see your supervisor, your coaching supervisor, monthly. And I could certainly imagine that many people would almost gasp, like, what, every month? Is that really necessary? We haven't talked about, how much supervision should one have?
I see my supervisor monthly. It ends up being about 10 months a year. And I have 2 steady peer supervision practices, and then 1 kind of unsteady, but peer supervision for our team coaching specifically. So supervision is my main CPD, and I also do a lot of other CPD. I'm always learning. It's part of how I bring more to my work and to my practice. But supervision for me is probably my best form of CPD. I find it extremely helpful.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm conscious of time, and I want to sort of close out our wonderful hour. I'm just wondering, Dorothy, what more? Where would you like to, if we were to close, what do we think we want to focus on? There may be a question, an inquiry.
What would we want to focus on? I think I'd like to close with an acknowledgement, I think, actually, of the system of people who have taught me and brought me to where I am. It really is the system. I was thinking about that. There is no one expert out there. I would give the most credit to the Coaching Supervision Academy, CSA, for not just its teaching, but its faculty. All of the members of the faculty are extraordinary. I wish I could call them all out by name, but they're all extraordinary. And same with the organization and relationship systems coaching, or extraordinary training, and faculty and members of the community, because I've been part of the community of both of those organizations. My supervisor, my clients. One of the most important things about supervision is the supervisor learns too. Ideally, if you're doing supervision well, you're learning too.
Absolutely.
And all of the many big names who've written books and have models and theories, I won't name them all, but they're all part of what has the system that has supported me and others to be great supervisors.
Absolutely. Peter Hawkins, David Clutterbuck, Tanya. There are a lot of names of people in this field.
I don't want to leave anyone out.
Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I saw one of the questions there. I think, Claudia, it's ORSC, ORSC, stands for Organization and Relationship Systems Coaching. And CRR Global is the name of the organization that puts on that teaching. They also have supervision for I think, for team coaches, or for ORSC practitioners. There are many. Oxford Brookes does another training, I know, in the UK, and we'd love to hear from people around the world. Whoever's listening in, please, if you feel that you want to champion a coaching supervision or a team coaching supervision training that you've done, and you'd like to draw us attention, please bring it into the community. This is about sharing knowledge together. I had many more questions, of course, but I think for me, what I'm taking away from this conversation is this thing that it is very nascent, and that we are co-creating this together. And I think one of the things that one can do when you move into any sort of practitioner status is begin to think that you're not enough, that you still have to learn. You have to get, if you don't have your PhDs, or you don't have your lots of letters behind you, that you're not there yet. And while we have said, and I think there is a degree of rigor that is needed, a training, especially because of the group dynamics, because of the systemic elements of holding a coaching system, just the different levels of complexity. I do think that one can start to develop a reflective practice, and one's own. You can bring some colleagues together and find a framework and start to really support each other as team coaches or as coaches to reflect on your own practice. But for sure, working with somebody who's got the depths of experience that you do. And so we want to thank you very much for bringing all that experience and all that wisdom. And some of the other people we've mentioned, it does make a difference. And I think I'm going to leave it there. We've literally got 9 seconds to the hour, Dorothy. I'm going to just wish you, I'm really looking forward to watch this recording back. And I'm hoping that the audience have also learned something. Thank you very much for your questions. And goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.